Here we are, Life in Stages. I'm Joel Greenberg, and we are in the studio with Patrick Galligan, and very lucky to have him with us. I think it's worth mentioning that we were scheduled to meet with Patrick a few days ago, but furnace issues in this city have been rampant, and Patrick and
many other Torontonians.
Yes. Lots. So it is lovely to actually have you here.
Thank you, Joel. Thanks for rescheduling me.
Of course. And the one consistent thing with the podcast is where I begin, and because I have a fascination with where people who have dedicated their careers to the arts, to the performing arts in particular, and have been doing this long enough to say, this is my life, my professional life. Did this begin was this part of your upbringing? Was your family life in any way connected to the arts, however peripheral?
Not really. My father is a retired judge. He's still with us, as is my mom. And his father was a judge. And so both my brother, who's 4 years older than me, and my sister, my elder sister, they're both lawyers. Okay. So there was it was a pretty traditional conservative, small C conservative upbringing. I was born in Ottawa and then moved to Toronto when I was just before my 8th birthday. Okay. My father got appointed to the bench, the Supreme Court of Ontario. So I went through the Catholic school system. Mm-hmm. And although there was, music and some theater that was done, but it was the theater particularly was extracurricular. And so it wasn't a major part of my upbringing. But we did have a couple of great music teachers throughout elementary and high school. Okay. And so in grade 5, I joined the concert band and picked up the trumpet, and a great teacher by the name of Bernard Clark. By the time we had a handful of songs, we were gigging in shopping malls and track meets and old folks' homes and other schools, anywhere they would have us. We were packing up and going on the road, and these sort of afternoons and mornings. Yeah. And that continued through high school with John Volpe at Brébeuf, who was the two of them were just extraordinary musicians and inspirers of playing music and gigging. Okay. And there was something about being in a band with, anywhere from 20 to 50 of us all getting together, rehearsing as a unit, everybody trying to find where that third trumpet comes in and plays. And I think that, as a start, opened me up to the possibility of the ensemble, of working as a collective, working on a piece that had many different voices and trying to find yours in the middle of it, or mine in this case. So I think, there was never through high school, grade school and high school, there was never really an opportunity, or the possibility of a life in the arts wasn't really part of us. Right. You'd go into engineering, medicine, law, accounting. That was all sort of how it was funneled in the training for it.
Sure.
But thanks to a couple of great music teachers, I fell in love with the performing arts. Okay. Did some theater throughout. I remember in grade 7, our elementary school went up to grade 8. Grade 7, the grade 8 class was looking for Jesus in their Passion play. And the director, Harry Lavery, couldn't find one in the grade 8 cohort and was looking in the grade 7, and I got picked. So I was, up in my Adidas shorts on the man-made cross that they had, fashioned for us, at the top of Blessed Trinity, altar or just in front of it, cursing the fact that I was, meeting my end, but also being benign and holy at the same time. So that was my first real taste of it, and kind of, still looking for a part as good as Jesus almost 40 years later.
Yeah,
so.
well, Adidas, thanks. I mean,
Thanks, Adidas. Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's a wonderful lead-in, Patrick.
Okay.
I'm going to read what you sent me as what's included, I guess, currently in the programs at the Shaw Festival.
That's right.
And perhaps in other places where you work, but especially at Shaw.
Right.
So this is how Patrick introduces himself to the audience. In the fall of 1985, I was in my 4th year of undergraduate studies at the University of Toronto and awaiting the results of the law school admissions test, the LSAT, which I had recently written. At the same time, I'd been cast as one of the junior officers in Anton Chekov's Three Sisters at U of T's Hart House Theatre. Entering Chekov's world of heartache and hope and immersing myself in the rich history of that theatre changed everything for me. Any thoughts I had of following my father and his father before him into the legal profession were put on hold while I asked myself, if I could do anything professionally for the rest of my life, what would it be? Well, soon after, I began applying to theatre schools, one of which, thank God, accepted me. Which school was that, Patrick?
I did the graduate program at York University. I did the MFA.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this major shift and change of focus and change of direction, how do you absorb that?
Well, I absorbed that. Okay, so at the end of high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was a math science guy, particularly math. Loved calculus of all things, but I had done theater, not only the passion play in grade school, but throughout. We did a production a year at Brébeuf, and finished grade 13. It was the time when we still went to grade 13.
Yeah.
And really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I thought, I actually took a year off and went ski bumming, and that didn't help. It gave me no further direction, except that was fun. But my parents were very concerned that I go to university, and so I did. And I thought I'll buy some time and I'll go in undergrad, take some survey courses, figure out what I want to do. So by the time, I ended up with a English philosophy double major, and I was sort of vamping, thinking, I'll tell everybody I want to go to law school. Everybody will go, oh, okay, what do you want to do? What do you want? Oh, I'll go to law school. Oh, okay. Well, then they'd leave me alone. Yeah. And I could go off and do 15 hours of classes a week and then go to movies and, hang out downtown at campus. I came to my 4th year. I had written my LSAT. It was good enough. I thought, I'm going to get into law school if I'm not careful. And did this play and really thought, oh my goodness, that was so wonderfully enriching and full and gave me a sense of direction and purpose in that play. It was just an extraordinary experience. I don't know whether it was a good production or not, but it did open up something for me. Yeah. So instead of applying to law schools, I applied to theater schools in the I guess, early new year of my 4th year. So that would have been the second term.
Yeah.
And did not have much success at all. The National Theatre School said, thank you, no thank you. Ryerson said the same thing. I did get an offer to go to the American Academy of Dramatic Art, but that would have cost, $500,000, I think. Not quite, but it might as well have been. Yeah. So I auditioned I thought, okay, Pat, you're going to have to start at the bottom. So York University had a Bachelor of Fine Arts program. I thought, go there and start at the bottom. And, you're raw, you have no technique. So if it takes 4 years to get a degree, in theater performance, so be it. So I went to one of those auditions, a group audition, and one of the auditors was Leon Major. And he sort of said, you're 23 now. What are you doing here? I said, well, I did 4 years of undergrad at U of T. He said, have you finished your degree? I said, I'm a couple of courses short. He said, do you think you could finish it by the end of the summer. And I said, I think I could. He said, because you'd be a good candidate for the graduate program. So I finished my courses, got all my degree qualifications at the end of the summer, and then went into the MFA program, and that was full immersion. We weren't really part of the BFA program. We saw them occasionally on, in gatherings of the department, but we were way off in Bethune College in the West End in a sort of studio in the basement, and there were 12 actors, 2 playwrights, and 2 directors.
Okay.
And we had 2 years of intense conservatory training.
Yeah.
After which I started auditioning and got into Stratford for the 89 season as an apprentice.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that was sort of the transition from kind of pretend wannabe lawyer to deciding to go into the theater to getting into a program that I thought was extraordinary. There's some wonderful Leon Major was part of that first. He taught us the first year, and then David Rotenberg came in. We had Dean Gilmore and David Smuckler, and it was just an extraordinary. I remember looking at my my class schedule for the for the first week, and I had been doing arts in undergrad, and it was like 9 a.m. tap dance for 2 hours, then a 15-minute break, then voice for an hour and a half, then lunch, then stage combat, then singing, then scene study, and I just thought from 9 till 9 at night, 5 days a week. I was like, oh my God, if I survive, it'll be great.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was good training because that, as you well know, Joel, the hours are long in the theater, and you better get used to those 12-hour days back to back to back, because that's going to be your life if you're lucky. So.
Well, you've sort of moved to not my next question, but what the transition that you had from training into the profession, which was pretty quick, and so you're an apprentice at Stratford. And what did apprenticing at Stratford entail?
Well, I had seen The Young Company the summer before. Robin Phillips' company at the third stage, which included all those Soul Pepper people, Albert Schultz and Susan Coyne and Stuart Hughes and Nancy Polk, and just this extraordinary. So I saw, and watching those shows, The King Lear and The Twelfth Night, I think in '88, changed my life. I thought, I understood it all. I was heartbroken. Shakespeare had, like many of us, had put up some barriers. It was difficult to enter that world for me, but it was so accessible and so exciting. So when I did an audition for the apprentice program at Stratford and got in, I was like, I'll go and just do that stuff.
Yeah.
By the time I got there in '89, that company was gone.
I see.
Robin was gone. So it was a very different place. It was John Neville's last season. And what you do is you have, you're the third spear carrier from the left, but I had 7 understudies in 3 shows, plus my regular track. I had a couple of lines. I was Moth, the fairy in Midsummer Night's Dream, so I had 2 lines here. And the second line was, and I was like, I've made it. So this was, I was sort of found myself in a place that I kind of dreamed of after seeing those shows, and realized it was a very different place than my imagination, as often is the case. But, and it's a big machine, and I was so, really, I was not mature enough, I think. I was so anxious to come back that I missed the present, being present there and just enjoying it and assuming that was going to be my last season there. So I had learned that lesson then. So that was it was a very interesting education. I watched a lot of great actors and tried to determine how they did it and what their secret was. About 6 weeks before the end of the season, I got the note in the mailbox that they had at the stage door of the Avon Theatre. And it was, just want to give you a heads up. We don't have anything for you next year, but well before the end of the season, we wanted to let you know so you could find something else to do. And I was like, what? Yeah. But this is where I'm supposed to be. And no, they did not think that was the case.
It's a familiar story. Yeah. And Stratford, I think probably even because you've been at Shaw for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's really the only other festival theater, sort of long-standing theater festival in the country.
Yeah.
And I know so many people who had a similar experience, not necessarily apprenticing, but the anxiety of, will I be back?
Yeah.
And talking with one of the guests from also in this series, saying, how much anxiety there was, and a very close friend of mine who was there for a couple of seasons, each season, probably sometime in August, when all rehearsals were done, right. Then the anxiety, and when I would visit her, she would whisper. I mean, no matter, even if we were in the park, not just, I'm not sure that I haven't heard anything, and some people have, and some people haven't. Yeah. Think, it is brutal, and yet, as Shari Flood has said, I know you know Shari very well. Should it is a year-to-year. That's what it is, and so you learn that if you can.
Yeah.
Okay. So
it was a great first, initiation into just the main lesson is to be present in the room.
Yeah.
That was the lesson, as hard as it was to get that information.
Yeah.
What was of huge benefit to me is kind of coming to understand what was the most important thing about being an actor in the theater.
Yeah.
I remember coming out of that season, and about the last 2 weeks, I thought, okay, I don't know. What do I do now? What do I do now? I have to go back to Toronto and then do generals, and, the whole plan was thrown, out the window. So I thought, I'm going to talk to the artistic director, the new artistic director coming in, David William. I'm going to ask to have a meeting with him, and I'm going to say, do you have any advice for me? Because he had shadowed that season, and I had auditioned for him for the following season, and I assumed he had some insight to provide to me. And so I went to the secretary and asked if I could have a meeting, and they were, I'm not sure, he's very busy. And I was like, and I was asked, who are you? I said, I'm Patrick Galligan. I'm an apprentice. I've been here for 7.5 months. Anyways, so I went away thinking, well, that's not going to happen. And I got a phone call saying, David will see you at 10:12 tomorrow morning. So I went in, and he granted me an audience, and I said, thank you so much. He said, no, it's fine. And a very tall, intimidating, intellectual, Oxonian guy. Yeah. I was quivering in his presence. And I said, I just wanted to, say, I'm sorry I'm not coming back, but I wanted to take something away from this. And do you have any advice for me? And he kind of looked at me blankly and said, well, you seem like a reasonably intelligent young man. What I can say is that you don't, as far as I can tell, you have a strong masculine side of you, but you're imbalanced. You don't have a feminine side to balance that. And I suggest that, what you do is you work on your feminine side. And I'm thinking, okay, this is great. This is great. And I said, how do I do that? And he said, well, what you need to do is you need to, when you're back in Toronto living your life, you need to, when you're out and about, look at something and decide whether it's masculine or feminine, and then ask yourself why, and then try to determine what the feminine about that object is, and how what's the nature of that, and how you can cultivate that in yourself. And I'm like, okay. They said, for example, a mailbox, is that masculine or feminine? And I'm like, masculine. He said, good. Why is that? And I said, well, it's rigid, it's structured. He goes, excellent. A stretch of road. I'm like, oh God, Stretch Road. Well, that's feminine. Good. I'm thinking I'm 2 for 2. This is awesome. He says, why? I said, well, because it's promise. It offers promise and it's limitless and, excellent. Now, a shoe. And I can't remember what I said, whether it was masculine or feminine. Whatever I said, no, you see, you have so much work to do. And I walked out of there thinking, if only I'd Quidditch at stretch of road, I would have got an offer for the next season. Damn it, I got, and I thought, oh, this is nuts. It's nonsense. And I walked out of there thinking, oh, for God's sakes, what a bunch of crap. And I'm sure there was lots of useful, something useful in there, but I realized that I may have been well out of there. And ultimately I think I needed to go away. And,
Well, I have a David Williams story, not to match you, but as you were talking about it, in my attempt to to have my moment at Stratford, I think it was really thanks to Colleen Blake, who was the producer, right?
Okay.
And I knew her from Young People's Theatre, and I knew her well enough to say, I don't know how you even. I can get through the door if I buy a ticket, but is there any other? So I'm sure it was through her that this meeting was arranged. And David Williams is pretty intimidating, hands-off kind of guy, right? And I had no idea who he was. And we were chatting. She said, what do you want? Like, what would you like to do? I said, well, I'd like to follow you and just see how this place works.
Right.
He said yes.
Was he artistic director at the time?
Yes, he was just. I think it must have been when he was planning his first hands-on season.
Okay.
And then he said he mentioned it may have been Love for Love. It was a restoration play. He said, "What do you know about restoration?" And I said, "Well, I know for a minute." And then he mentioned Love for Love, and I thought, I know the title. It's like me, masculine, feminine.
Yeah,
He said, well, choreography. He said, I see you've done choreography. I said, yeah, I have. He said, well, what kind of choreography would you bring to that? At that point, I thought, if I had any smarts and confidence, I would have said, thank you I really don't want to take up any more of your time, sir. But no, I said, I don't even know what we said or what I said. He said, well, one must research. I said, yes. I think, how do I get out of here? I asked to get in here. Where's the door? There's the door. So, needless to say, that was my.
You've had your sit down.
I had my moment.
Yeah.
And I left thinking, oh God, this is not really where I'm going to be.
Yeah,
working.
this isn't a good fit.
Anyway, back to you, Patrick. Okay, so how long was it between then and when you were at Shaw? Now, I'm going to keep coming back to that only because I know you've been at the festival for so long.
Yeah.
But the first time I saw you perform was as the gentleman caller in the Glass Menagerie at Tarragon Theatre.
Right.
And I don't remember exactly when that was. It was a long time ago.
97, I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
And being so struck by, I've seen the play a few times, and I do think the scene with the gentleman caller is the best part of that play. But it was, your performance was phenomenal.
Oh, thank you.
It has stayed with me for a long time. So that's when I met you from a distance.
Right.
So there's obviously quite a bit of time between when you left Stratford and certainly when you did the Glass Menagerie.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you had even started the Shaw Festival by then.
No, no, I didn't. My first season at Shaw was 2003, which was Jackie Maxwell's first season.
Okay. So why don't you maybe fill in a little bit between Stratford and Shaw?
Sure.
Because there's a lifetime in there.
Sure, there is, yeah. So I moved back to Toronto and started in the fall of '89 and started doing generals and auditioned in November, I think, for Duncan McIntosh, who was a protege, and I think the associate artistic director at Shaw, and a protege of Chris Newton's.
Yeah.
And he was taking over Theatre Plus and was putting together basically a mini Shaw. He wanted a summer company that in rep.
Mm-hmm.
And there were, I think, maybe 16 actors, 2 of which were to be apprentices. Mm-hmm. And he brought in Tom McCamus, Jim Mizon, Barbara Gordon, Chick Reed. Sheila McCarthy was supposed to be in that first season, and I knew none of this, right? So it was one of many generals I was going for, and did it. And then about, it was end of February, like months later, long after I'd forgotten it, I got a call from my agent saying, you've got an offer here for Theatre Plus, and it would start in like 3 weeks, and you'd be doing 5 plays. In rep, you wouldn't, but there would be a total of 5 plays you were in. Only 3 or 4 of which we were actually doing in rep at any one time. But it was, I thought, oh my goodness! So that happened. I ended up doing 4 seasons with them, and then it folded.
Right.
And then was like back at square one. It felt like, but I did a High Park show, and then we did. There was a coronation. There was a Festival of Classics in Oakville. At Coronation Park under this beautiful willow tree, and I did a few Shakespeare's there. We did As You Like It that Albert Schultz directed. Mm-hmm. That was before he founded Soul Pepper, and that gang founded Soul Pepper, and we did Twelfth Night and Love's Labour's Lost. So that brought me to, and I was doing regional theaters and trying to pick up TV and also doing day jobs at my brother's law firm. Thank you, Tom, for saving me for all those years. Because Brenda, I got married and we had a son, and we had a mortgage and all that stuff. So and Brenda was so busy taking care of our son, so there was all that trying to just job it, a couple of days on a series and a regional and $400 a week in a park, and then in 2002, I got an offer to go back to Stratford.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
And I was like, oh, wow, fantastic! I'm back. 13. The years have got. There's been enough changing of the guard that and I think that was mostly Martha Henry brought me back to play a part in Richard III. So 2002 happened. At the end of that season, there was no offer, and Jackie that was fall of 2002, and I got an offer for from Jackie Maxwell to be part of her first season.
Yeah.
And basically I've been there ever since, with the exception of 2012, which is when I did Warhorse in Toronto.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, is it this, I'm not digging, but it's a kind of digging question.
Dig on.
How are those 2 festivals different to be working in? Realizing that you've actually spent so much time in one and limited time with lots of time in between at the other. So I don't even know if there's a way of fairly contrasting.
Right. And I preface all this by saying the Shaw Festival has been extraordinarily generous to me. Yeah. And so I like it a lot.
Yeah, of course.
I like the organization. I like the way it's run. Yeah. Stratford, I was not of use to them, so I'm not as fond of it. So I admit a bias. I think primarily, and this is not my revelation. I think it was talking to one of my colleagues at Shaw, Graham Somerville, who said, the plays based on Shakespeare are extraordinarily hierarchical. They are kings and lords and ladies, and then your underlings or your lower characters. And so there's a very rigid class structure.
Yeah.
And that exists in that company.
Okay.
There are leads that are entrenched and are brilliant, and then there are the lessers as you go down the pecking order. I certainly felt that.
Yeah.
Shaw is much more social, a socialist, mandate. Yeah. There is a collective there. Yes, there is a hierarchy. There are leads and supporting players, but more often than not, the contract involves, if you're at a certain level of experience, they'll have a lead for you, and then they'll have a support for you, and you will understudy. They're understudies. I'm not sure of any of the the leads at Stratford understudy. Their workload is too great. So I feel very much at Shaw that there is a collective there.
Yeah.
Now, that is not everybody's experience. I know that.
Yeah.
But for me, the feeling was, you welcome and you look after those below you, and you are welcomed and looked after by those above you who've been there longer.
Right.
You are, it was very clear to me that even in my first season that I was welcome and appreciated for what I brought.
Yeah.
Don't know if I ever felt that at Stratford in my limited experience. One minor example, when I was finishing my 2002 season at Stratford, I got an offer to do a play in Toronto that would have conflicted with the 2003 season. So I sent a note to the artistic director and the other directors that I'd worked with saying, here's my situation. I don't know if I should take it or not. If there's a prospect next year, I see you're doing this play and that play. I'd love to be in it. I didn't hear anything for a couple of months. Something similar happened on my first season at Shaw, and Jackie's door was right sort of across from the green room, and it was often open, so you could pop your head in and go, "Hey, Jackie, have you got a sec? I've got a play that I've got offered for the winter, but it might interfere." And she said, give me a couple of days, I'll get back to you. 3 days later, she said, "Here's what you're doing next year. Here's when your start date. Does that help? Would that work for you?" And I thought, thank you. Thank you for, being approachable. Thank you for allowing us in. Now, Stratford has 120 actors. Shaw at the time had like 65 or 70. So there, the imbalance in terms of, how do you look after everybody in your under your charge in one versus the other is there's a great disparity there.
Oh, sure. But it's interesting as an audience member, having attended both festivals a lot. I'm sure, in part, Shaw has the Shaw Festival, regardless of the artistic director, has always felt to me very familial. And although I've no doubt if I spoke to everybody who was working there in any capacity, there would be a variety of responses to that statement. And I think maybe some of it is, as you say, really defined by the work that is done. And I've no doubt also that the nature of the town helps to really consolidate that. Yeah. And I was really taken by surprise when I was made aware that when you're in the town, and it's particularly in the high season, and the street, Queen Street is busy, and I said, "Oh, all these people going to the theater," and being told, "No, most of these people don't even know there's a theater here."
That's true.
Yeah, they're here to buy fudge and other things.
Yeah.
I said, "Oh, well, okay, but there is a theater here, and there's more than one." Yeah. And Stratford it's a small city. It's not a town, right? And so you're very aware of that. Yeah. And there's walking from the Festival Theatre to the Patterson or to the Avon, right? You're not walking through town. No. You're really there. So everything about those two worlds is so different. But the point that you said that Graham made makes perfect sense. That, when you and I have worked on a few things together, and the material you work on really often defines the nature of what the whole company will be. Indeed. And so that's so interesting to hear. And clearly, he said as though he knew, but you've done the range of what you've been handed and challenged with at Shaw. It's wonderful. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So it isn't, we'll have you back doing the same. We'll call the character different, but you've already done this. Yeah.
So Sir Robert to Sir William, you just switch that. But one thing I also noticed long before I I worked at Shaw.
Yeah.
Going down in the 90s to see Christopher Newton's company at their most integrated.
Yeah.
I would go to Stratford and I'd see shows and I'd go, oh my God, Brian Bedford was absolutely brilliant, or whoever was brilliant. But boy, those, the lower tiered, or just, I'd go, he was great, she was great. I'm not so sure about them, but I'd go to Shaw and I'd see Neil Monroe's production of St. Joan. And there wouldn't be a weak link in that chain. Yeah. From the page boy to Dunois page to the anybody in the it was extraordinary. So all I left that theater with was contemplating my relationship with God. Yeah. Right, the message of Shaw's play was resonant and haunted me, and the instead of it picking apart what I liked and didn't like about it, it was so integrated, so full, so completely immersive. Seeing Mary Haney's face on those, those TV monitors up there, and seeing the intimacy and the expanse of the festival stage was still to this day. I think that's what it's about.
Yeah. No, that is. I mean, it's. They're they're distinctive companies, right?
Yeah.
They're not, it's not about points of comparison, but they offer very different things. And I'm sure they offer different things, but artists derive differently.
Yes. And my experiences at Stratford too allowed me to meet. There are tons of like-minded artists there. It's a company that big. Yeah. You can always find colleagues of a similar sensibility and rich friendships and professional relationships as a result of that.
Sure.
Just working with, they're great people to find there for sure.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, you mentioned a little bit earlier, having a family. You have a son who's now
30.
I think when you and I last worked together, he was either hoping to work in the police force.
Yes.
So where is he now?
He is a constable with the Toronto Police Services. Okay. He's coming up on his third year anniversary. Getting his badge. Good. And he loves it. He's found his path, and it's remarkable. It's, as you can imagine, as a parent, you go, oh my God. And my father, I heard another police officer got shot. I'm like, yeah, Dad, I know, there's that.
Of course.
But, and we see him and how's it going? He goes, oh, it's great. It's great. Really? And tell us some horror stories. Tell us some war stories, and he'll, it's very entertaining and horrifying in turns. So he's doing well. Yes,
that's great.
Thank you.
Oh no, that's great. Now that, because I remember it wasn't anxiety, but you knew how serious he was and how passionate he was, and I think at that point he wasn't sure. He was hoping to have this opportunity, but didn't know it would necessarily happen.
Yeah, and it wasn't easy for him. He applied and went through the application process, which is rigorous, as you would expect, and did not get accepted in his first application for reasons that were no fault of his own, as far as his father and mother think. And then the pandemic hit, and they shut down recruitment.
I see.
And he was at home with us during the pandemic when the shutdown happened, and was at odds. Was trying to find work online, and then having a really hard time. And then they opened it up again. He got into the first class being recruited, but like anything worthwhile, he had to really work at it and suffer through some hurdles that tested his desire to do what he wanted to do, as
for sure.
you know, as we all, you know,
no, the story,
face.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you mentioned, and others have said, with theater school, for instance, I auditioned everywhere. I didn't get in. Stories of people who we don't know, but who we know from having seen them, on television, and film, who have similar, who, this is where I wanted to go. They had, there was no interest on their part. And in some cases, yes, I was able to get into this school the second or third time that I auditioned. Right. It doesn't happen fast. No. Now I know, because I keep coming back to how much time you've been at the Shaw Festival, but so when you are there, it's for an extended period of time. Yeah.
It's anywhere from 6 to 8 months is usually the contract there. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you're working outside of the festival, how, I'm sure by now you know exactly how to calibrate or how to pace yourself, but going from a system in which you are rehearsing multiple plays over extended periods of time, as opposed to working on a play where you've got 3 or maybe 4 weeks to rehearse, and that's the only, there aren't multiple plays. Are you now at a point in your life, in your career, where that transition is something you don't even think about anymore?
Yeah, it's I mean, obviously the time periods are different. The kind of the period of just mulling over the part, and it's a much more extended period in rep than it is in stock, as you well know. But a play is a play, and you've got the schedule and is there, and that's when you open, and I think the amount of rehearsal time, for the most part, hours in the hall are comparable. Okay. Particularly, and I want to laud you in Studio 180. You're allowing 4 weeks of rehearsal. It was such a luxury for me to be doing stock plays with that. That by the time we hit the theater, we knew what we had, right? And it was always, and that must have been a huge financial burden on you guys, and to factor that in for the quality of the work spoke volumes, and you're prioritizing rehearsal instead of just getting it up and getting the show going.
No, I think that, I appreciate that, because that's true. I mean, it is, by the time Studio 180 was up and running, I had already been, I'd had lots of opportunity to do, like, you've got 10 days, you've got 2 weeks, and you can do that for when you're eager for the work. Yeah. So, I'll take just about anything. And yes, of course I can do that in 10 days. And after a while, after you do a number of those, I can, but no more. Yeah. I mean, to what end?
Yes. I mean, I found myself, back in, doing plays with short rehearsal periods, like 6 months after the gig was over, going, oh, that's what that moment was, If only I'd love to revisit that now. Or you just, by the end of it, you'd somehow have gotten an appreciation of what the play was about, 6 weeks in.
Yeah.
And,
no, well, when it's that fast, you have to make you make decisions quickly. Yeah. And you often don't have a chance to change your mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you do, it's going to have an impact on everybody.
Indeed,
right?
it will.
And it's
what are you doing? What are you doing? You just changed that. Yeah, because I realized what it meant. Yes. No, you have to go with what you thought it meant.
That's right. We were doing, but that isn't what you did yesterday. There's no time. There's no time.
That's right.
Yeah. No, the aim of getting onto the stage when you have to add the design and technical elements to feel at the to feel that the play is there. Yeah. And that you can put it aside for whatever time it takes to add all the other pieces and to complement the play. But we both know certainly what it's like not to, like, you quickly begin to resent tech and other things because you're not you want to get back to the play that isn't there yet. Yeah. No, that certainly was a big thing for me. while I was at Studio 180. And yeah, I mean, it it was an expensive operation.
Yeah. Well, it showed from an audience point of view, from shows I saw, and also inside. It was always, it was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah. Well, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Bravo. It was always a pleasure.
Now,
Yeah.
Curious. You've been busy and you've been doing this for a few decades, and at the same time, you have a personal life.
Yeah.
And I'm always curious to know how people in the profession and married to a performer,
Yeah.
how you are able to carve out a personal life. Assuming, I mean, yes, we know that there are a lot of relationships that can't, that don't sustain themselves for a variety of reasons. No doubt, it's certainly not unique to the theater. But I ask this because I know that I don't list among my special skills and my strengths the ability to compartmentalize. So the professional and personal often bleed into and get in each other's way, with the professional often being the one that pushes the personal away. It
has a way of doing that, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I'm curious to know what that's like, in the Galligan family.
Right, in the Galligan Robbins family. Yeah. Well, like many couples in the theater, we met working together. In fact, Brenda Robbins, whom I married in 92, she replaced Sheila McCarthy in that first season at Theatre Plus. Sheila was supposed to play the lead in The Three True Loves of Jasmine Hoover, a James Nichol play. Canadian play, comedy, and I was so excited when I got my offer for that. I thought, Sheila McCarthy, are you kidding? I heard the Mermaids singing. This is, oh my God. First day of rehearsal, who comes in? It's Brenda Robbins. I'm saying, who's this person? Where's Sheila McCarthy? And she got, I think it was Die Hard 2, and was shooting that and had to pull out. Okay. So I was like, oh man, she's fine, but she's no Sheila McCarthy. And then 3 years later, I'm marrying the woman. I thought, Sheila McCarthy, who's she? But we decided, so we were living together, and Brenda had a couple of years of television work and managed to put a down payment on a house in the late 80s. So we lived together. We got married in 92, and then decided we'd like to have a family. But we decided, we were together most of that time. All that time, she would, do some regionals out of town in the winter when Theatre Plus was not performing, and I'd do the same thing and try to get some work. But when we decided to have a kid, she said, okay, only one of us can work out of town at one time. We don't want to be one of these nomadic couples that are relocating every 6 months. That's a recipe for screwing up your kid or kids. And I said, okay, yeah, that makes sense. She said, we have a home. Let's make sure one of us is here, so our children or children can go to the elementary school that feeds into the middle school, that feeds into the local high school, and there's neighbors around that know us, and there's a support structure. And I said, yeah, that sounds like a good plan. Well, fall of 2002, Jack is what? He'd be 94. He'd be 8 at that time. I get an offer for Jackie Maxwell's first season in 2003. A week later, Brenda gets an offer, and I go, babe, we'll both down there. Well, that'd be fantastic. She says, no, we can't both do it. We made it. I said, well, let's move down there. No, we're not going to do that. So that was sort of at that point, I thought, okay, I'll go down for a season. I had learned my lesson. Don't assume you're going to be there any length of time. Just go for the season, learn what you can, and then come back. And that was 22 years ago. So, what they would come down, Jack would come down for summers, but it's not fun for them when, I'm working 6 days a week. She said, I'd love to come down and hang out with you, but it's not my home and you work all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah. So we had, I'd go off and do a season at Shaw and come home for the winter and basically be the primary caregiver for the winter months.
Right.
Brenda had Soul Pepper for a long time and would do regionals in the winter. And so we kind of divide up our time that way. And we've been married, we'll be 33 years this fall. And I think we've actually lived together for maybe 10, just because of the separation and the need to prioritize a stable home for our son. Yeah. And that was the right call. Yeah. As much as I've been apart from them and away from my wife for such a long time, the prioritizing our son seems to have paid big dividends.
That's great.
And we're still married, so I love her.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
Yeah, it's good. That's important
to hear.
Yeah.
When you were talking earlier about the Shaw Festival, essentially sort of welcoming you or making you feel that you were acknowledged as a real member of the company and all of that. I know that you're a senior member of the company now, and I'm sure every season there are new and younger people who come into the company. Yeah. And I'm curious to know if over many, many years, do you notice any change in the way in which actors either present themselves or come into the company, or is there something generational, or is it simply that there are, it's like, in teaching with students who are essentially the same age as we, when I was teaching, they're the same age, but I'm not. Yeah. I get older, but they stay within the same range. So I'm not sure. I'm curious to know if you have noticed any difference in what young actors are bringing into the company.
Well, the Shaw was in need of diversification for sure. Yeah. The particular mandate of Shaw and his contemporaries and even what Jackie modified to contemporary Shavians, adding playwrights like Tom Stoppard, Lucy, Willino, people who write plays that are dealing with social issues. Even that was still white, Anglo-centric. It is now, so there were a lot of those kinds of young actors coming in and filling those roles. So now it's much more diverse by necessity and by we need, just in terms of representation, we needed that change, no question. So there are a lot of cultural influences that are being brought in, which are very rewarding. In terms of individuals, some come in thinking they know it all, as I did early in my career, thinking I know what was good and bad. Some come in wide-eyed and just ready to just suck it all up. So that really hasn't changed as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. What I know has happened is the culture of rehearsal has become much more accommodating and inviting and constructive, as opposed to taking issue with a choice. There, somebody might say, that's not the way I see it. There might be conflict that would be brought into a rehearsal hall by senior members or somebody who's just, fixed on what they believe is how this should go and will voice that. Yeah. It's become much more inviting of opinions that may not. So there's it's just a much more constructive problem solving instead of, wait a minute, that's not working. It's like, how can we make that work? It's that culture seems to be the profoundest change in the Shaw, and I think in theater in general, in my experience.
Is is that in any way connected to the cultural change you were talking about?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's not the loudest voice in the room that carries the day. Right. That in fact is, you know, that gets shut down, and or those people just aren't back. You know, there's part of that. But you know, in some ways you go, well, you know, we got to fight. We got to like debate this stuff. Yeah. And that's still there, necessary. It's done in a more, let's try that. Let's try your way. For some reason, that doesn't feel right, but let's explore that before we discount it.
Okay. So staying on that a little bit, because the festival it began in the 60s, right?
Yeah, 62.
Yeah. So a festival that is that established, and having a major shift in both in adjusting the mandate, but much more so culturally, forcing itself to be more open than it had been.
Yeah.
How was, and you were there, you've been through that transition. So how does the festival, it's not a person, but it is an organism made up of people. What is that period like? What is that transition like for the company and for the town?
Well, it's, I think what happens is the festival is ahead in terms of the audience. Mm-hmm. The Shaw Festival has programmed the Mahabharata and, plays that are about African American culture, plays that are about Asian culture, that are targeted to that audience and anyone else who is interested in it, right? And I think as a result, the traditional Shaw audience goes, I'm not sure this is speaking to me. So there's a real risk for a theater company to broaden its cultural mandate and do full-on shows on the main stage and dedicate that and the resources to that, and then have to bear the consequence of it, not being a big draw for the usual crowd. So that is added to the very long list of challenges theater companies face on a day-to-day basis, let alone season-to-season basis. But you have to persevere and press through it, and hopefully there will be a dividend at the end, and we'll see lots of different faces in the audience and all interested in theater, not specifically Shaw theater, but all kinds of theater.
Yeah. So where would you say, or can you say, where that transition is now?
I think the Shaw was very ambitious in trying to diversify and come out of the pandemic with lots going on, invite the audience back in, and it was a great intent. I think the audience was, for various reasons, were reluctant to come back with the same enthusiasm that we were inviting them.
Yeah.
So things have scaled down. Okay. Companies got smaller, less plays, and trying to be more populist in its programming.
Okay.
Doing the Sherlocks, doing the big musicals are still, like Stratford, are the economic engine of these big festivals. And
I mean the music. Yeah, it is. I mean, that's where I started musical theater, but I haven't done that for a long time, and I know. Again, from friends who were at Shaw for a very long time, that when Christopher Newton was there, he wasn't interested in having a musical on the main stage for the very reason that once it works and it becomes the engine, you can't move it off of that stage. No. So it's not a price. In a sense, it is. It's the price you pay for that. And and I think both for Shaw and Stratford, it's clearly a necessary choice, or it's become a necessary choice. Yeah. So the task, the great task of a company, training an audience, teaching an audience, helping an audience. The company itself becomes challenged by the very choices that it makes, and all the more so when finances are as precarious as they have been. And then coming out of the pandemic has only been hell for. I know the last project I did with Studio 180 was a play called Indecent, and we were about a week away from starting rehearsal in April of 2020 when everything stopped, and then I didn't know that we would get to it, but we did in the fall of 22, thinking, well, people are going back to the theater, and they were some, and it was a huge project, and I remember the first performance, the first preview performance, looking at an audience with a lot of people wearing masks. And I thought, oh my God, this is so sad, because I can't hear the audience. And what are how are the actors going to? Well, the actors were okay.
Yeah.
I mean, they said this wasn't exactly what they, longed for, but there was an audience, and at the end, the audience was extremely responsive. But it was just heartbreaking to say, so this is what the theater is now, looking out at, and oh God. Yeah. And I think it's still, people are, and it's still taking time.
It is.
So the challenges, all of that never stops.
You didn't have to go through the, we're allowed back in the theater, but only 25% capacity. And you've got to be separated. And so I remember, we got back in 21 and we're playing we did outdoor shows, and then we were finally allowed to go in, and it was, 25% and Charlie's Aunt, a comedy. And you think, ooh. But on the other hand, we were so thrilled to be back doing it because we didn't know if we ever would be.
Sure.
We all thought, am I going to be sitting in my basement for the rest of my life?
Yeah.
Or am I actually going to be able to be in a rehearsal hall or on stage ever again? That was a true existential question we all faced.
No, we didn't have that. I know when we rehearsed Indecent, the going in, we did this with Mervish Productions, and they had experience. I think it was with Come From Away, which they'd opened and closed and opened and closed, and eventually said, we can't keep opening. We just can't do this. Yeah. And so the rule going into rehearsal was that everybody would wear masks, and anybody who felt uncomfortable would wear a mask. And we talked about that, and the actor said, well, can we take off our masks when we're actually in a scene? I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, you can. But all the actors didn't want to. I said, well, okay. And I think we did that for 2 days, and sitting and watching. I said, I can't sit here for 8 hours with a mask on, and watching a scene. I remember in particular a scene with two women, one of whom was wearing a mask, one of whom wasn't. I thought, oh my God, this is, I don't even know what we're doing, and I'm sure that nobody knows what they're doing. We're all flailing. So after that, it was decided that everybody would be without masks, and that they would wear masks when they were not on stage. That lasted about an hour. I said, you just can't. You can't do it. And we also knew that if anybody got sick, the whole show would stop. We didn't have understudies. We just didn't have that kind of... And the only person who did get sick was the assistant stage manager, who, it was announced on the first day of rehearsal, had over the weekend tested positive for COVID. So she was never even in rehearsal. Said, so, okay.
The gods were shining on you.
And it was it was like that throughout. I mean, it was a series of, you may not, of course, during the run, and I'm sure this was the same everywhere. Nobody's allowed backstage. If you have somebody coming to the show, you'll meet them outside of the theater, somewhere else. There will be no opening night reception. There'll be no closing. So, oh my God, this is, we did it. And, it opened and it closed, and the show closed when it was supposed to. It wasn't premature, but it was, it felt like we felt, I think some of us felt somewhat both heroic and like we were in some kind of underworld.
It's true.
Somebody else's world that wasn't our own.
Yeah. And also extremely grateful for being able to do it even under those circumstances.
Oh yeah.
Just thinking, thank God. Yeah. But I remember, we would rehearse it with the masks on, and then eventually, I think once we were doing tech runs, sorry, Mike, take off your mask and you could actually see your scene partner's face fully, and it was like, oh my God, look at you, and look at what you're expressing that I've been missing all this time. It was
a horrible time. Just
it was
horrible.
Scary, for sure.
And lots of phone calls. Lots of phone calls from friends saying, "I'd love to see the play, but I'm not. I'm not ready to go there yet." So you can sit in the balcony. There's lots
the back row of the balcony.
Right.
Pretend you're not even there.
That's right. There's lots of room.
Lots of room up there.
No, there was such heightened anxiety, and it was just the way it was.
Indeed.
Okay, well, we seem to be, past that, or getting very close to being able to look back on rather than live in the moment. Yeah. And as we come to the close of this conversation, Patrick, I'm curious to know, all along the way, undoubtedly there are people who have been hugely instrumental in helping shape your career. And I don't only mean people who gave you contracts and said, yes, you may be an actor now for the next 6 weeks or whatever the length of time, but people who really did either inspire or changed the way you saw yourself. And that too is not always something that, certainly as a young actor, I wouldn't have known that while it was happening. I mean, I might have felt an affinity to somebody or admired someone, but I'm just projecting. I was far too self-absorbed to have really heard what was being said, but in hindsight realized who had actually been substantially important in my own development. And I don't know where that is for you.
The list is so long. I from the teachers who I mentioned, particularly the music teachers, to Leon Major giving me the boost to go to the MFA program, to Duncan McIntosh hire me, as you say, just because they give you a contract. But the people I think who've really influenced me the most are the many actors I've worked with. Just time on stage or in the rehearsal hall. Excuse me. I think it has impacted me more than anything else. There have been the directors like Neil Monroe, Jackie, of course, Tim Carroll, of course. They have shaped my working relationship and what I've been afforded to work on, for sure. But great actors just doing their work has changed my life. Watching them either in performance or being in a play with them. And there are too many to, I would omit some that I'd kick myself. But it's, the thing that I come back to all the time is the power of the creative spirit in the room, that everybody is involved in. A great group of actors, a committed director who's done his homework, the stage management, the design team. Everybody is, they're all extraordinary artists working at a level you just think, I need to bring my best, and I need to work hard to do so, because everyone else is setting a standard here that I need to come up to.
Good. Oh, yeah. That's a good place to bring this conversation to a soft close. And thank you. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Lovely getting to know somebody in a way that in rehearsal there just isn't the time or the opportunity.
Yeah, and you always go, we got to get that drink.
Yes,
got to go for that coffee.
And
like,
so we could,
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you who are listening, and to all of you who are listening, please share this episode and other episodes in Life in Stages with everybody you know. We talk to each other. Patrick and I have enjoyed. It's wonderful having the opportunity to talk to somebody in the studio, and it really helps to know that we are not we are not alone. We are not talking alone. It's not just Patrick and me and Mike at the board. So please do share this, and I look forward to more guests as we proceed through Series 2. And thanks again, Patrick.
My pleasure. Thanks, Joel.